In the old days of the emperors, when dragons carved of wood guarded every doorway and the sky itself seemed lower over the golden roofs of the Forbidden City, there lived a monarch who desired above all things a bell greater than any bell ever cast, a bell whose voice could shake the mountains and hush the storms and be heard from one end of the empire to the other. So the decree went forth to every foundry and every forge within the 9 provinces. A master caster must be found who could pour such a bell. And the man chosen was old Quan, whose beard was white as winter snow, and whose hands had shaped more bronze than any living soul. He bowed low before the edict, but his heart trembled, for he knew what the emperor's favor truly meant. For 3 months the fires burned without rest. Quan and his men fed the furnace with charcoal until their eyes were red as embers. The bronze was melted, the molds were sealed, the hour was chosen by the astronomers. Yet when the metal poured, it would not flow together. It hardened in lumps, cracked, and split the mold. The bell had failed, and the emperor's patience was a thing that wore thin. A second time they tried, and a second time the metal betrayed them. The bronze hissed and spat and refused to blend, as though some spirit within it fought against being shaped. Broken fragments lay scattered across the courtyard like the bones of some dead beast. Quan knelt among them, knowing that a third failure would cost him not his craft, but his head, and the heads of all his men. Word reached the palace, and the emperor's wrath came back like a wind from the north. A messenger arrived in black and crimson, bearing words that needed no reading. One more chance, and no more. The master's daughter, watching from behind a screen of carved lattice, saw her father's shoulders bend as though a mountain had been placed upon them, and she understood that death had come to stand at their door. Her name was Konai, and she was gentle as the willow that bends over still water. She had no power at court, no gold, no influence, only a daughter's love, which is the quietest and most stubborn force in all the world. That night she crept to her father's side and found him staring into the dark, and she asked him, in a voice that did not tremble, what could save them. And the old man, because he could not lie to her, told her the secret that the astronomers had whispered. The bronze would never blend, they said, until it was mingled with the blood of a maiden, willingly given. The moment the words left his mouth, he wished them back, for he saw the light that kindled in her eyes, a light that was not fear, but something far more frightening. Konagi said nothing. She rose and walked into the garden, where the moon hung like a silver bell above the roof tiles. She thought of her father's white head laid upon the executioner's block, of the men who had wives and children of their own, and of the great bell that the empire waited for. And by the time the moon had climbed one hand's breadth higher, she had made her choice. The third casting began at midnight. The furnace roared like a caged dragon, and the heat turned the darkness itself to shimmering gold. The bronze melted, the astronomers struck their gongs, the molds were opened. But again the metal would not flow. It lurched and clumped and began to cool, and the workers cried out that all was lost. And then, from the shadows at the edge of the firelight, a small figure stepped forward. It was Konai. She had dressed herself in white, the color of mourning and of purity both. She walked toward the furnace as one walks toward a beloved, without hurry, without hesitation. Her father saw her and ran, crying out her name, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the fire. The workers lunged to stop her, but her hand was already upon the rim of the great crucible. She turned once and smiled, a smile that was said afterward to have broken every heart that saw it. Then she leaned forward and let herself fall, as a petal falls from a high branch into a waiting river. The molten bronze received her with a sound like a sigh, like the closing of a great door, and a column of white light rose from the crucible into the night, brighter than any star. And the bronze, which had fought against its shaping for 3 long months, suddenly yielded. It flowed smooth and bright as a river of stars, filling every corner of the mold, joining with itself, becoming one. The fire no longer roared but sang. The workers fell to their knees. The old master stood motionless, the place where his daughter had been still shimmering with heat, and he wept without sound, for he knew the bell would ring. When the molds were broken, there stood the bell, vast and smooth and the color of dark honey, taller than 3 men, perfect in every line. When they struck it, the sound that poured forth was like nothing ever heard on earth. It was deep as the sea and sweet as a woman's voice calling a name across the water, and it carried for 100 miles, and every soul who heard it stopped and stood silent, and many wept without knowing why. They hung the bell in the great tower by the river, and for 1,000 years it rang at dusk and at dawn. Travelers crossing the mountains said they could hear within its tone a faint cry, like a maiden's voice calling out, and they named it the soul of the bell. Mothers told their children the story of Konai, the girl whose love became bronze and whose blood became song, so that her father might live. Whether the story is true, no one could say. But in every age, there are those who give themselves for those they love, quietly, without witness, without reward, and the world goes on ringing because of them. The great bell is long since gone, melted down or lost to war and time. Yet the legend remains, and it asks us a question older than any bronze. What would you pour into the fire if those you loved depended on the casting? And so the tale of Konai endures, passed down through 1,000 generations as a parable of devotion that asks nothing in return. In a culture that reveres filial love above all virtues, her story is no mere ghost tale, but a mirror held up to the soul, reminding us that the most beautiful sounds in the